We start in the United States. It is, of course, the world's largest economy. And today we have learned that in the first 3 months of this year, it shrank at an annual rate of 4.8%. The country has introduced lockdown measures to slow the spread of coronavirus, which has killed more than 58,000 people there. And as you can see from this graph, the US economy has suffered the sharpest drop since the financial crisis more than a decade ago. It ends the longest expansion in US history as coronavirus virtually shut down the country. But the figures don't actually reflect the full extent of this crisis, since the country did not begin its lockdown measures until March. So, as the economist Mohamed El Arain points out on Twitter, the next quarter could see the US economy contract by as much as 40%. Well, here he is outlining what this will mean.
It's a battle against global depression. And what today's number tells you is two things. One is the urgency of containing the damage so that short-term hits don't become long-term hits. And the second issue it tells you is that we've got to build a runway for medical advances to be able to sort out this lives versus livelihood equation. And importantly, not just to win the war against the depression, but to secure the peace. We failed to do that in 2008. We won the war against the depression then, but we didn't secure a peace of high, sustainable, and inclusive growth. Today's number tells you that even now, we have to think about winning the war and securing the peace.
Well, despite the threats to economic growth, the US Federal Reserve has said that they will be keeping interest rates between 0 and 0.25%. The former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says that containing the coronavirus outbreak is still America's primary concern.
We do know that economic downturns cast a substantial shadow forward. And the people who are going to be the victims of this, in many cases, are the people who are coming out of school into a very weak economy. And studies show that people who come out of school during very difficult times, the impact of that is there 20 years later on their wages and the quality of the jobs they have. So it's a very big deal to do what we can, everything we can to support the economy through this period. But we need to remember that it all starts with the virus. If people are terrified to work with others or terrified to go into a store, you can do whatever you want with interest rates and you can have whatever fiscal policy you want, but you're still going to have an economy that's weakened.
Well, the decision over how and when to reopen the US economy has caused new divides amongst Americans. And Nick Bryant has been speaking to some of them in New York.
Can't even wrap my head around it. It's incredible.
Steve Margarella owns a road building firm in Staten Island, which he fears will be bankrupt by June. He's a Trump supporter who believes the Democrats who run New York are being too cautious.
If I'm not working and this economy is not opened up, and these fearmongers don't back off where they got everybody scared to death, we all go out of business.
Steve, it's a vicious virus. I've had it myself. You accept that?
And I'm sorry to hear that. The reality of it is people are going to continue to get sick. I don't think they're going to continue to get sick at any alarming rate.
We're seeing more beggars on New York streets. This is Harlem, a mainly African-American community severely hit by this health and economic contagion. And this is upscale Soho, the home of high-end retail, boarded up like a hurricane is about to rip through, which economically it has, every single shutdown day.
Don't open up too soon.
But public health officials such as Danielle Umpod, who live in these communities, warn against the rush to reopen.
People are hurting financially, they're struggling to feed their families, but we really need to take this slow because I would hate for us to have to shut down the economy again if we get more cases.
So some of the perspectives from New York. Well, here's Samira Hussein with more on the tug of war which is happening in the US over public health and economic growth.
we're seeing lots of different state-level governments are really trying to grapple with, which is why you're seeing that in parts of the country, in places like Georgia, for example, you're seeing some slow reopening. But of course, the great fear is if you start to reopen parts of the economy too quickly, are you going to spark yet another coronavirus wave? And will that be even more serious? But there's no way to discount the kinds of severe economic numbers that we're seeing. And when you want to talk about like these economic disparities, it certainly is being evidenced here in New York. Again, we saw a part of that in Nick's package. The economic disparities that exist in New York, this pandemic there is no doubt it is going to exacerbate those. And that is one of the challenges. Just how do you try and protect all of the citizens, again, while trying to reopen the economy, knowing full well just the economic tsunami that is coming through this country?